Hello and welcome to the London part of the Sunday Politics Show. Coming up later in the programme, as the highest court in the land finds the government guilty of failing to meet air quality standards, we put their record and Labour's in the dock. Joining us for the duration of the show, SIOBHAIN McDONAGH, Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden and formerly member of the London Regional Select Committee, and Bob Neal, Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst and Conservative Vice Chair for Local Government. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
How do you account for the poor showing in the local elections?
It's disappointing, but it's a fairly regular occurrence, as you all know, Joe, for there to be setbacks for governing parties mid-term. In this case, of course, there were two parties in coalition government, so both us and the Lib Dems were going to suffer losses rather than the Lib Dems picking up a protest.
But Bob Neal, you've
could
made
have been
losses.
a lot worse, though, actually.
Well, it can always be a lot worse, of course, but it could have been an awful lot better.
Well, no, actually, Joe, I make the point because we were starting from an almost historic high in those elections, 2009. Although we lost some ground, what's very interesting is although Labour recovered some traditional ground, they didn't even get back to where they were in 2005.
This is your core vote. These are the areas that you should be doing well, even in mid-term. You made losses in every county that surrounds London. It was not a job done well, even regarding the previous results and where we are in the parliamentary cycle.
As I say, you expect a setback at this time. It is actually less than we have seen governing parties suffer during Margaret Thatcher's premiership and under Tony Blair's premiership. Of course, you never want to lose good councillors, as we did, but in Essex, for example, we still have 4 times as many councillors as any other single party.
Right. I mean, SIOBHAIN, the best Labour can do is come second in just one of these councils. Hardly the big breakthrough.
We haven't controlled most of these councils in the 40 years they've existed. This is not traditional Labour territory. But what we did do is in a number of the parliamentary seats we really need to win to get anywhere near government, in Crawley, in Stevenage, in Hastings, all those places where we want to make progress, we have.
Right, Tony Blair said there were no-go areas for Labour, didn't he, before he came into power? These are the areas you have to be making some ground if Ed Miliband has any chance of becoming Prime Minister.
Some of these areas, absolutely, and we have seen progress.
But you didn't win any of them in those areas.
In 1997, we actually lost this set of elections, even though we had 179 majority in Parliament. What I'm saying, Joe, is that some of these bits we can expect to do well, and we did, and others, it's a much more uphill struggle for us.
All right. Now, these elections are likely to be remembered for one thing, and one thing only, the rise of UKIP. But exactly where is that journey going to end? Victories on the borders of London are one thing. Can Nigel Farage's troops mount a serious campaign to take the capital when London has its own council elections next year? Andrew Cryan reports.
They're still a long way from being the biggest party on London's borders, but for this weekend at least, they are the biggest news. UKIP are now the second party of Buckinghamshire, where they gained 6. The Tories lost the same number. And in Essex, 9 gains have made UKIP the joint second largest party, along with Labour and the Lib Dems. In Surrey too, they found themselves up more seats than any other party. Hertfordshire was a less successful night though, with UKIP not winning a single seat. It might well be Nigel Farage's own Kent though, where they saw the most impressive result, winning 17 more seats than they did in the previous election. They'll be the official opposition.
I think the UKIP vote tonight has shown that there is a certain element of protest, somewhat larger than I would have expected.
But UKIP certainly aren't the first small party to win lots of votes.
You toppled one of the safest Tory seats in the country. You are going to give such a scare to the government that they won't know what has hit them.
In the 1980s, the SDP were often said to have made a definitive breakthrough. They even won a quarter of the vote in the 1983 general election. The Green Party too, in 1989's Euro elections, came third with an impressive 15% of the vote. And let's not forget even the BNP, who managed 1 million votes in 2009's European poll. So come next year's local elections in London, what can we expect from UKIP?
But it's worth remembering that the outer boroughs of London, particularly those on the east, you might argue, are not unlike the counties just outside. Indeed, they share the same postal designation. So, you know, Havering or Bexley are not as different from Essex and Kent as inner London boroughs might be compared with, Hertfordshire. So I think that we can learn something from what's happened, and the idea that London will be immune from a national phenomenon like the rise of UKIP, I think is unlikely.
Not long ago, voting for a predominantly anti-European party in local elections may have seemed a little confusing. For many voters this week, it made complete sense.
Andrew Crine reporting there. Well, the phrase Basildon man has long been synonymous in political terms with the bellwether seat, where the way the constituency votes is nearly always the way the country votes. Well, joining me is Kerry Smith, newly elected UKIP councillor for Basildon, one of 9 new UKIP councillors in Essex. Kerry Smith, welcome to the programme. But let's get all of this into perspective. UKIP don't control a single council. Your best showing was in Kent, where you only managed 20% of the vote. You're still a very small party.
Heavily on the march, and we're pulling off some fantastic gains. In your piece earlier, raising the issue of next year's London borough elections being possibly on the same day as the European elections, I think UKIP's got a chance of grabbing many, many councillors. In March, I was a colleague.
What about a council itself?
Well, what we've got to do is show people we can do a good job as a local councillor.
And you've got no experience of doing it, have you, up until
That's right. You've got to learn how to crawl before you can walk, and that's what we're going to do. If we don't demonstrate to the people we can do a good job as their local councillor, why would they want to elect us to run their council?
Small parties have their moments in the sun, and you could argue this is it for UKIP. You're predicting marching on London, and certainly you're predicted to do well in the European elections. But is it anything more than just a protest vote?
No, not at all. A protest vote is just a one-off, and that's it. 2004, we won a few councillors on the same day as the European elections. It was repeated in 2009. Last year, we won several elections in Essex. Averley switched to UKIP on Thurrock Borough Council. We won a Conservative seat on the Billericay Town Council.
But what are they voting for you to do?
It's the local things that are not being addressed. Well, as my colleague in Averley who won the seat, it was a safe Conservative seat. People wanted someone to speak up against the overdevelopment of their town.
Kerry, don't you think it's not actually about the really local stuff? I mean, congratulations on winning your seat, and I hope you enjoy being a councillor. It's a great privilege, but on the council, it's not. It's going to be about the local things. But
yes.
When I've spoken to people who want to vote UKIP, what their concerns are is about the national things, about job security, about the future, and that actually it's not really about Europe at all, or not very much.
In fairness, when your good selves are knocking on doors, it's senior politicians. You've got the ear of the leader of the opposition.
I don't think anybody described me as a senior politician.
Of course you are, Siobhan.
Yes, but hang on, there is research from YouGov that says less than 10% back the party because they think they would run the country well, and actually it's 60% of the people who voted for UKIP are unhappy with the major parties. That is the reason they vote for UKIP.
I mean, I can't speak for these pollsters, but I got elected in several issues in my division, and the big one was about the plans to build on Dry Street. If you went round Wesley Heights now, there's people, regardless of how they voted, with posters in their windows, save Dry Street. And I was elected on, partly to save Dry Street, and that was in my literature.
Understand that, Kerry, and can I just make a point, and congratulations to you,
Thank you.
Percy, as well.
You don't want to call him a fruitcake or a loony?
No, I
I'd like to mix a fruitcake. I
don't think that calling names is the answer. I think what we are going to be doing, and I'm going to make the point to Kerry, though, is this, that now people are in elected posts, they're going to have to expect to be subject to the same degree of rigorous scrutiny as all other politicians. And, for example, it became pretty clear that the real issue that worries people isn't just Europe. I agree with Siobhan on this. It's issues like the cost of living, like the economy, like getting welfare right, where generally I found people on the doorstep thought the government was doing the right thing. But you've got a complete gap in your policies for sorting out the economy. There's a £120 billion gap in your spending.
Well, the EU costs the British economy £150 billion a year, according to research by Professor Tim Condon. Now, our view is leaving the EU, we can deregulate our economy and make this country a driving force for growth.
Right, and on that basis, would you be in favour of a mandate referendum, Bob Neal, on the EU in this Parliament?
I think the one thing we've got to be realistic about is that there would not be a majority in the House of Commons to deliver the primary legislation.
Because of the Liberal Democrats?
Because the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party would vote against it. Would you be in favour,
because many of your colleagues have said in the papers today they would be in favour, though, of having that legislation put forward and put it to Labour and the Liberal Democrats and see what happens?
Well, I think you just have to be careful about promising things which cannot realistically be delivered. I'm very clear that we will, and I personally, as well as in our party manifesto, will be campaigning on the basis, as you said earlier, Joe, at the next general election, it's going to be a choice between who runs the government, who you have as Prime Minister, David Cameron or Ed Miliband, and we are saying that we will offer a referendum on a renegotiated basis, so people will know what they're voting about before they get the referendum. I think that's the more responsible way forward.
If I may interject very briefly, you should pull the tails of the Lib Dems. They've often promised to give people a referendum on Europe. You can get all their old leaflets, you can get their manifestos if we can dig one out, and say to Lib Dems in Parliament, we're going to have this vote on leaving the EU. You've promised it. End of story.
You'd new to UKIP.
I am totally in agreement that the Lib Dems have on a number of issues not kept their promises. But equally, we have formed a government in the national interest. Well, I think if you and I, Kerry, would agree that we inherited an appalling financial situation from Labour.
A lot of people
might say the really first task for the government is to sort out the financial mess and then certainly, with I hope a Conservative majority at the general election, we go in for a serious renegotiation.
That's looking under threat from UKIP.
Europe.
What about Ed Miliband's position? Are you happy with Labour's position on welfare?
I think that welfare is a kind of a complex issue. Again, it's a bit of a mask for people's concern about the future, about jobs, about how we spend money.
Has Ed Miliband been clear